Oh. Ahem. Righty. Ahem. Right. Hey guys, how are we doing? Back another video from Mother's Basement. Today we are checking out the day anime changed. Let's get into it.
What is the greatest anime of all time?
Whoa.
I'm sure every one of you watching this has an answer, and it may even be a pretty good one. But there will never be a truly definitive one because it ultimately depends on what the person doing the answering values most.
Yeah, it's a lot of personal opinion is definitely involved in the answering of this question.
Great characters, a tight plot, strong sakuga, cool fights, memorable music, how tasty the food looks, is Norio Wakamoto in it? Depending on your criteria, you can make a valid case for anything from Akira to Zatch Bell. And while a select few anime obviously have more valid claims than others, those still number in the dozens with each new year, each advancement in animation technique and technology, bringing with it the potential for a new top contender.
Mate,
A lot of folks
Cyberpunk
would say
Edge
it's
is
free
so
reign,
good.
and you can make a pretty compelling case for that, even though the show is barely 2 years old. On the other hand, though, if you ask what's the most important anime, you might not even need that other hand to count all the valid candidates, none of which came out in the last year, the last decade, or shit, even this millennium. Of course, there is one especially obvious answer, and obvious for very good reason. Tetsuwan Atom,
Astro Boy, okay.
the original anime. The point where Japanese animation truly began its evolutionary divergence from Western cartoons.
I mean, you gotta respect where it started. Come on.
The blueprint for shonen action. The prototype for mecha. The start of the manga to anime pipeline. The testbed for the artistic techniques and sponsor-driven cost-cutting business strategies that built the foundation of the entire industry and the cornerstone of its first creator-owned empire. Every other anime lives in the mighty Atom's shadow. And so any other real contender must, by necessity, be a work so singular that the light casting that shadow bends around it. A flashpoint between anime as it was then and anime as it is
Now?
Something like Dragon Ball or Sailor Moon, which codified an entire genre, brought anime to a wider audience
It
than
most
it
definitely
ever
did.
reached before, and in so doing created aesthetic signifiers that still define what anime is in the global public consciousness to this day. Though I'd argue that both are much better candidates for most important
Tuxedo
manga,
Mask.
and even then, not the strongest by any stretch. CBR would argue, in a list that happens to include both of those titles, by the way, that Cowboy Bebop deserves the crown because its run on Adult Swim made a lot of Americans think anime is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that's such a laughably wrong answer, it causes me physical pain. But the really funny thing about that is, as wrong as they were almost right. Because at its core, Bebop is really just a space jazz riff on the characters and formula of
Like Lupin the
Lupin
Third, right, yeah.
whose 1971 anime adaptation is, I'd argue, the earliest serious nominee after Astro Boy for most important anime. Its raunchy adult content paved the way for Japanese audiences to see anime as more than just cartoons for kids, which it very much was throughout the 60s, and it gave one of the medium's most influential visionaries, Hayao Miyazaki, his first ever directing role. Though even if Lupin did pave the way for it, you can make a very strong argument that anime didn't really start growing up until 1974's space battleship Yamato.
Yo,
a
okay,
TV
yeah.
original space opera with a complex, fully serialized storyline whose sweeping scope was only made possible by the boundless creative potential of animation. Anime had been balancing serialized storytelling with episodic accessibility as far back as Astro Boy, but Yamato expected viewers to commit and watch every episode in order just to understand it,
Damn.
making it one of the earliest truly modern examples of the kind of storytelling people come to anime for. In its English dubbed release, Star Blazers is the first taste Western audiences were ever given of that specific flavor of storytelling. You know, the kind that completely defines our current binge streaming era of digital entertainment. Though, if we are thinking about this purely in terms of truly era-defining works, there's only really been one more since then. The postmodern era of anime as
Evangelion, of course,
otaku-driven,
yeah.
self-referential art ushered in by Neon Genesis
Evangelion.
whose success also cemented the production committee funding model's dominance not just over anime, but the entire Japanese entertainment industry to this day. Although, in that last regard, you can argue the films that pioneered that business model, like Nausicaa and Akira, were just as important, if not more so. And what's more, both of those were essential in legitimizing anime in the eyes of Japan.
Mate,
and
Akira is
the
so
world as
freaking
not
good,
just
though. I'll never forget watching that for the first time. That was one of the... That was before I knew what anime was, and I didn't realize I'd been watching anime, and then Akira and Ninja Scroll, Ghost in the Shell, Blood the Last Vampire, Perfect Blue. They were the things that got me into anime proper.
good television, but proper cinema. And that is precisely why this conversation is so different and so much narrower from the best anime one. Because unlike quality, which shifts with tastes, influence only grows over time. The further forward we go, the harder it is for any one work to have such an earth-shattering impact that it can legitimately overshadow everything that came before and influenced it, and reverberate far enough to affect all the other works that also branched off from those influences. Like, postmodern anime did start with Evangelion, arguably, but, you know, there's works before that you can kind of say are postmodern too, and Revolutionary Girl Utena was in development at the same time as Evangelion, based on a lot of the same influences, and is, a lot of people would argue, just as important, which means neither one of them can be the most important. I would say that the most recent one with any remotely compelling claim on the crown would have to be 1997's Pokemon anime, which didn't just change the industry, but the whole goddamn world. It broke through the final barriers standing between Japanese animation and global mainstream cultural recognition, and in the process redefined the meaning of brand synergy by creating an inescapable multimedia vortex that bent the course of tens of millions of childhoods toward one singular goal: catch them all. But even Pokemon wasn't the first or only brand that sold a monster-taming fantasy to the kids of the 90s.
Monster
it just
Rancher?
did the best job of capturing that particular zeitgeist. And even the monumental leaps forward that it made for anime were achieved by building on and refining the prior international marketing success of titles like Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon, and, more importantly, the multimedia merchandising model pioneered by the actual, objectively correct answer to this question.
Gundam? Yeah, there we go.
Yoshiyuki Tomino has been part of the TV anime industry since almost the very beginning, joining up with Osamu Tezuka's Mushi Productions as a PA way back in 1964, barely a year after the debut of Astro Boy. He must have really impressed the upper brass, too, because within a few years, they had him working as a writer and episode director, and by the early 70s, following the creative exodus from Mushi that led to the founding of Sunrise and other studios, he found himself directing entire series. One of those was 1975's Raiden the Brave, a fairly
I've
conventional
never heard of
for-the-time
this.
tale of a plucky Japanese kid using an ancient magical super robot, in this case the ancient guardian of the lost continent of Mu, to protect the world from giant monsters and other giant stuff, notable for its, at the time, brand new toy-selling gimmick of the robot turns into a plane. Now, Tomino didn't invent Transformers. He was only brought on to direct someone else's very profitable idea, but something about the super robot concept must have really spoke to him, because when he was given the chance to create his own IP at Sunrise, basically every series he made had a giant robot in it somewhere, starting with 1977's Invincible Superman Zambot 3, followed by 78's Invincible Steelman Daitarn 3. He started to develop the darker style of storytelling and penchant for killing off characters that would eventually define his entire career, continuing the trend of more mature, teen-centric mecha stories started by Go Nagai's Mazinger Z.
Mazinger, yeah, of course.
As it clearly inspired him, Tomino felt restricted by the contemporary super robot formula, with its rigid good versus evil binary and hand-wavy, fantastical world building. He felt there was space in the mecha genre to make a proper mecha space opera in the vein of Leiji Matsumoto's Space Battleship Yamato. Something where the super robots were a little less super, more akin to souped-up versions of the powered armor from Starship Troopers, mass-produced weapons of war that could be used to explore the morally gray reality of international, or in this case, interplanetary conflict. Also, he wanted to see more anime people get slapped.
Damn. Okay.
In 1979, he and mech design collaborator Kunio Okawara got the chance to tell their gritty war story, though compromises almost immediately had to be made to get their sponsor, Clover Toys, on board, making the mecha more colorful, shiny, and all-around kid-friendly than the gunmetal gray killing machines that they originally envisioned. But Tomino gritted his teeth through these indignities, confident that his vision of a bold anti-war epic would resonate with the broader public in Japan. And as we all know, when Mobile Suit Gundam finally hit the air in April of that year, it was a massive and immediate flop. It did have its fans, a handful of teens plus a whole load of housewives drawn to its soap opera-esque drama, the same demographic that kept Star Trek alive during its lean early years in the States, funny enough. And their votes did help it win the first ever Animage magazine Anime Grand Prix, but ratings were sluggish, and those more mature viewers weren't exactly keen to buy cheap children's action figures, so Clover pulled the plug 3/4 of the way through a planned 52-episode run, leaving Tomino with just a month to hastily wrap up his epic story. And that might have been that for Gundam and the entire super robot genre, had Sunrise not secured a last-minute licensing deal with Bandai Toys, who thought the customers for their already successful line of military model kits might be a little more keen to buy what Tomino was selling. And hey, even if they weren't, the kits were cheap enough to produce that it wouldn't be too much of a gamble. They had no idea how right they were. The Gunpla license turned out to be one of the greatest bets that anyone has ever
Of course,
made
it's
in
huge.
business history, and it forever...
You go any convention anywhere, and there are Gundam model kits, or just like, you know, statues, everything. Like, it's, oh wow, that was such a clever move.
changed the way that anime makes money. Gundam obviously was nowhere near the first anime to successfully leverage the power of merchandising. Astro Boy was selling toys from day one. Children's book series Anpanman built a Star Wars rivaling empire by slapping that cute little dude on any snack wrapper that would take him. Speaking of Star Wars, there is of course also Star Wars, and we can't forget about Hello Kitty either. But all of those rely on a similar marketing principle. You like the characters, so you buy shit with their faces on it. Bandai's Gunpla was something fundamentally different. Something that would prove to be orders of magnitude more compelling for those who bought in. A supplementary, parallel hobby with the potential to be just as engrossing as the original source material in a completely different way. So on top of the obvious market of people who just like anime in general and Gundam specifically, Gunpla was able to to reach people who simply like building model kits. And more importantly, it was able to convert the former into the latter and vice versa, creating a self-reinforcing fandom feedback loop. Over the years, this principle has allowed Gundam to rise up between Batman and Spider-Man as the 13th most profitable media franchise on
Mental.
Earth. And it's the same principle that would one day make the likes of Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon their billions and billions of yen. You play the card game because you watch the anime, because you like the video game, because you play the card game. And also maybe you get some breakfast cereal and stationery along the way. As Gundam went into reruns and more teens and young adults discovered it, Gunpla kits started flying off the shelves, and enthusiasm for the kits themselves rose to such a fever pitch that by the time Sunrise got around to compiling the first third of Gundam into a theatrical movie, the same business strategy that saved Yamato from obscurity way back in 1977, the premiere drew a crowd 15,000 strong, so large and rowdy the police were nearly called in. Years later, the newspaper Asahi Shimbun would dub February 22nd, 1981, the day anime changed, and at the very least, anime fandom would never be the same. There's a reason Japan's second big anime fan magazine, New Type, is named for the protagonists of Gundam. But now we're getting way ahead of ourselves. That film went on to become a multi-billion yen blockbuster, with the next two compilations doing similar numbers, and just as its ingenious merchandise would change the face of anime as a business, that success would change the face of anime as an art form. And not just in the sense that there's an obvious domino chain between that and TV anime films like Demon Slayer breaking the global box office today. Again, Gundam was nowhere near the first anime for adults, or even the first adult-oriented anime to make good money, but it was the first adult-oriented anime to make the most money of anything that year.
Wow. So
by
yeah.
the Hays Code and the Comics Code Authority, Japan had long ago discovered that there was a market for mature animation and comics, but Gundam proved that market was more massive than anyone had previously imagined, opening the floodgates for not just an entire new genre of grim and gritty real robot war stories, but all of the more mature movies and dark
Vampire
and
Hunter
raunchy
D.
straight-to-video OVAs that followed to release with more marketing and bigger budgets behind them. The modern anime landscape would look very different if not for Gundam, and that's
Crazy.
also true in a more literal sense. Because instead of filling a big-ass swimming pool with all them Gunpla yens and diving into it like some kind of cartoon duck, Sunrise reinvested that money in, among other things, paint, doubling the amount of colors they had to work with for their next show,
Wow.
Zeta Gundam, and allowing TV anime to go from looking like this to this.
Yo. Oh my god, what an upgrade. That is incredible.
Cinematic use of light and shadow, more deliberate, luxuriant visual world building, robot paint jobs that don't scream "artillery goes here" from across the battlefield, and at least twice as many slaps.
Nice.
Zeta is Gundam not just as Tomino envisioned it, but as he never could have imagined it. Obviously, it's still a TV show with wildly inconsistent quality throughout its episodes, but there are points, particularly in its credits and eye catches, though also within the episodes themselves, where its animation reaches a comparable level of polish to contemporary anime movies. And that may not sound all that special if you're one of them whippersnappers spoiled by the likes of Demon Slayer and JJK, but this was essentially unheard of when Zeta dropped in '85. Production quality had been improving through the '80s, movies, most notably in other Sunrise shows that also had some of that Gunpla money to play with. And OVAs had begun to blur the line between TV and film by this point, but even in that context, Zeta redefined what was cinematically possible on a TV schedule and budget. And as a result, it still holds up remarkably well by modern anime standards. It's pretty much the oldest TV anime that I'd unequivocally recommend to the kind of fan who worries about anime
Zeta
feeling too old. Though, depending on your tolerance for old school analog craft, Urusei Yatsura and Macross are also definitely on that table, as is pretty much everything else Sunrise made between the first two Gundams. As much as I'd like to say, for the sake of this video's narrative, that Zeta and 0079 draw a hard line between classic Tezuka-era manga cartoons and pre-digital modern anime as we know it today, the truth looks more like a decade-spanning gradient. But of course, I'm not here to convince you to watch any of those shows, or Zeta, yet. Gundam 0079 is vitally important to understanding the artistic and commercial evolution of anime, and it's the cornerstone of the Universal Century, one of the greatest shared universes in all of fiction, a gateway to fully enjoying the lavish productions and intricate war stories of not just Zeta, but Thunderbolt, 8th MS Team, Unicorn, and many more. Not to mention all the ways that alt-universe Gundam series like
I need to watch this. Oh, was it Blood Orphans?
Iron-Blooded Orphans.
Iron-Blooded Orphans. Oh, don't even mention Witch from Mercury. Come on.
Which from Mercury build on and pay homage.
First half. I mean,
to
yeah.
the tropes and
I see what you're
archetypes
saying.
codified in this original text. Every Gundam series is better when you have seen the original, as are a lot of other anime. And if you know anything about the gods of interreferential postmodern otaku anime who founded Studio Kara, and especially Fooly Cooly director Kazuya Tsurumaki, then I probably don't have to tell you that his new Gundam anime, G-Quacks, which drops in like 2 days as of me posting this video.
Yeah, is it the movie or is it because it drops on Amazon Prime Video, doesn't it? Like, but there was a movie being shown. So what was? Okay.
Is going to be the most
It looks
prime
incredible.
example of that ever. Despite taking place in yet another alternate universe and having a name like some sort of great old one. I'm not speculating when I say that, by the way. I have seen it in a Japanese theater without subtitles, and that did not dilute the feelings of raw hype and unfiltered passion for the franchise and the original anime emanating from the screen. If you're one of the cool and hot people who turns on notifications to watch my videos day one, you have just enough time to sit down and watch the Gundam compilation movies before G-Quacks comes out and the entire anime watching internet explodes with those same feelings, so you can be part of it. And I cannot emphasize enough how worthwhile a use of your time that would be right now. At the same time, though, whenever someone recommends the Gundam compilations as a primer for some new impending Gundam thing, or a classic Gundam thing they also think you should watch, that can kind of feel like they're telling you to do homework, right? Like, oh, here's this old, crusty piece of required reading that lets you watch other awesome stuff. Don't worry, though. We got the Cliff's Notes version, just 7 hours with some spruced up animation. Then you can get to the really good stuff. And I don't want to give you that impression, because Gundam 0079 is the really good stuff. Some of the best stuff ever put on Japanese television, in fact. Particularly in terms of music and sound design, which still remain iconic to this day. Not to mention storyboarding, which isn't quite the best of its era, but still makes it shockingly easy to get immersed in Gundam's world and the viewpoints of its characters, even when you can practically see the production being held together with hope and scotch tape. It's impressively, effortlessly watchable TV, and not just for its vintage. And while there is some better stuff animation-wise in the compilation movies that also makes them worth watching separately, it is absolutely at its best in its original final full-length form, which lets you really live on the space carrier White Base with her skeleton crew of soldiers and refugee recruits from a destroyed space colony, sitting in the constantly mounting stress and trauma with them during the downtime between battles for survival that have become their daily routine. Because that's where Gundam's story really lives. Not in the big picture of the war, but the very personal tragedies that it inflicts on the daily, and the small human moments shared by its survivors. And it really sets itself apart by taking almost as much time to humanize its antagonists as its heroes, accentuating the tragedy that these complex, sympathetic, often likable and well-meaning characters are pushed to hate and hurt and kill each other by circumstances beyond their control. As a result, both sides of this story have spawned iconic, archetype-defining characters across anime at large, not just the real robot stuff. But of course, Gundam's most impactful characters by far are its deuteragonists. Amuro Ray is a gifted and cursed child chosen to get in the world's strongest prototype robot and save the day by the unfortunate coincidence that his dad built the thing. And while Amuro displays an unusual, almost preternatural knack for the technical side of piloting and combat, the emotional toll it takes on him is something else entirely. Episode by episode, we see him retreat into himself as the threats to his life, the things he's lost, and the things he's been forced to do weigh heavier and heavier on him. The pressure to protect his friends and family, forcing him back into fights he's not equipped to handle, and ironically pushing him further away from those he holds dear as he has to harden himself to face the trauma. It's a deeply compelling arc, even today, that brilliantly deconstructs the teen hero archetype so prevalent in early anime, making Amuro an important precursor to most postmodern protagonists, though few anime, Gundam or otherwise, have tried to copy or deconstruct him nearly as directly as his co-star. Char clones are so prevalent in the modern anime landscape that they have their own TV tropes page. Mysterious, often masked, anti-heroic rivals who doggedly pursue the heroes while secretly pursuing their own ulterior motives beneath the nose of whatever main antagonist they happen to be henchgooning for. If this devilishly effective archetype were the only thing that Gundam ever gave the world, it would still be one of the most influential anime ever. And yet, for all the times he's been imitated, the original has almost never been matched. Char Aznable, the Red Comet, lives rent-free in the head of anyone who watches this show, as surely as he does in the heads of his enemies, through his unmatched screen presence and the rich, multi-layered character that underpins it. Terrifyingly competent and almost unshakably driven, with an Achilles heel of an ego that derails his schemes more often than he'd admit, yet never enough to completely upend them. He's a spanner in the gears of the war machine that makes the show's central conflict organically unpredictable, maximizing tension and drama down to the last nail-biting minute and beyond into every sequel. A perfect character, perfectly suited to Gundam's groundbreaking plot. The one-year war between Earth and its colonies is still one of the most believably messy and morally complex geopolitical, or I guess heliopolitical conflicts in science fiction. We see the events of 0079 mostly from one side of that war, but there is no good or bad side in this fight. The Earth Federation is an economically stratified, resource-hoarding neo-colonial superpower that brutally exploits the space noids under its heel while offering them zero self-determination, which has naturally fomented quite a lot of righteous indignation.
All this kind of stuff's reminding me of Zone of the Enders, like the first one. That was a good game.
But that populist revolutionary zeal has been co-opted and corrupted by the wealthy and power-hungry Zabi family to place themselves and their friends at the top of a fascist autocracy. The Principality of Zeon. So named for the spiritual philosophy of Zionism, preaching that humanity must move to the stars both to preserve nature back on Earth and to cultivate the next step of our evolution as psychic beings called new types, which the zombies have also co-opted to call for racial suppression of the filthy Earthnoids whose souls are tied down by gravity, and to justify dropping some really big rocks down our gravity wells. Rocks covered in artificial atmosphere, and also millions of people.
Whoa.
There's no good side in Gundam, but one side definitely commits more and bigger atrocities, at least more overt atrocities. And one thing you definitely miss out on watching the movies over the show is seeing every episode kick off with Zeon dropping an entire space colony on Australia, as the narrator matter-of-factly explains that half the population of the solar system has been wiped out in the last month. A statistic
Jesus.
so massive.
Dynasty Warriors Gundam, yes! What a game!
Really expect us to. We see this.
Me and my brother did like a playthrough of that years ago on this channel. It's somewhere. I'm sure there's a playlist somewhere of it. Two best bros play.
Or almost entirely from the perspective of boots on the ground. The pawns being moved around a board so large they can scarcely perceive their own square, traded and sacrificed by leaders they'll never meet, with no regard for the value of their individual humanity. Though Kill 'em All Tomino ensures that we feel every last on-screen loss. The Zombies' cult of personality looms large over this whole great, stupid tragedy, making them the more obvious villains in each of those characters' stories. But the cold, impersonal touch of the Federation brass, who treat their own people, including our heroes, as interchangeably disposable, is in some ways even more chilling. Gundam's plot is designed to make us ponder the human cost of war and how those who reap the dividends are so rarely the ones who pay it, in a way that resonates even today. At a time when animation and television were seen as lesser than live-action movies, Tomino saw a canvas for worlds and stories too expansive for theaters and too fantastical to film. A megaphone through which important messages could reach the masses like never before. His work pushed both mediums to new heights, opened the door to new audiences, inadvertently changed the trajectory of multiple entire industries, and laid the groundwork for the modern multimedia marketing landscape
they look so
for
sick
good
as well.
and for ill. In about a week, I'm going to recommend a whole bunch of seasonal anime, and none of them will be as worth your time as OG Gundam, except for maybe the Gundam one. Or the Shinichiro Watanabe one. It's actually shaping up to be a pretty darn
Ooh,
good
I need to watch
season,
that.
so stay tuned. But don't let the constant flood of new anime keep you from this all-time classic any longer. And if you'd like to see me cover more stuff outside the current seasonal landscape, please leave a like and a comment to help make this video a hit. Also, of course, don't forget to go vote for the Anime Awards, lest something you like not win an award. We can't have that, can we? I'm Jeff Thu, not a new type, just very passionate about my special interests.
That was an interesting look. I thought it was going to be about Gundam, because the original thumbnail just had the original Gundam on it, but then the thumbnail is changed to have Pokemon, Detective Conan, Cowboy Bebop all over it, so I was like, maybe it's not quite like that, but yeah, it was, which is fine. Very interesting look into stuff. I love learning random history moments with anime and stuff. Bandai making that deal, acquiring that, was just such a clever move, and obviously is still making money from it now, so that's just absolutely insane. And I do need to check out that new Gundam Quack, is that how he said he pronounced it? It's got all the U's in there. I wanted to go see the screen in the cinema the other week, but was not able to. But yeah, I think it's dropping on Amazon Prime Video very, very soon, if not already. But yeah, very cool video. Thanks for watching.